Okay, I don't usually do this, but I'm going to give a quick introduction. My entire premise here is that the relationship between Squall and Rinoa doesn't work because they are too dissimilar. One would have to change to fit with the other. I'm going to go into more detail about that and explain that further, but if you don't want to stick around for hearing me go on for a while, then that's great. Go about your merry way. However, if you do, thank you for staying. When I was about 10 years old, I remember reading through a gaming magazine. It was at least a couple of months old by the time that I checked it out, and I'm not entirely sure where it came from. Probably my father, but I honestly couldn't say with any degree of confidence. All I can say for certain is that I didn't buy it myself because I didn't really bother with that kind of thing. Gaming magazines. Never have. My preferred method of learning about new games was to go to a shop or library, if that was a thing at the time, and just browse the shelves. Word of mouth, I suppose you could say. Though I would sometimes flick through magazines that friends had picked up. I still don't know why I was looking at this one in particular though, because I'd seen it around the house, my grandma's house as it happens, several times and mostly ignored it. Something about that particular day just had me in a reading mood, I guess. I remember almost nothing about it. I think it was specifically about the Amstrad, the CPC 464, but I'm not even sure about that. It could have been a general gaming publication. I think I had a Commodore 64 and a Sega Master System by then as well, but it was still my primary gaming machine at the time, the Amstrad. I couldn't tell you about the cover, when it was released, other than 1990-ish. Nothing about the contents, apart from one game. There was this one game, due to release for the Amstrad. Something about it. Something about this one specific image of a ghostly, screaming figure aboard a spacecraft. Something about it just caught my attention and stuck with me. The game was Buck Rogers' Countdown to Doomsday. It's a game that never released on the Amstrad, though I believe it was originally intended to, and that's why it was in the magazine. I know it was on the Commodore 64, so I can't see any reason why it wouldn't work. I'm pretty sure the CPC 464 was stronger than that. I suspect the primary reason it didn't was because the Amstrad was pretty much dead in the water by that point. The Sega Mega Drive, Genesis if you prefer, and SNES were well established by this point, both dominating the gaming landscape in a way that had never seemed possible to that point outside of arcade machines, bringing with them almost arcade level parity in the confines of one's own home, sort of, and without the need to pump 10p pieces into them for 15 minutes of play. Yeah, we used 10p pieces at the time, not quarters. I'm British, if it wasn't obvious. I was enraptured. This was something new, something I'd never seen before. You see, up until that point, video games had been overwhelmingly dominated by platformers and side-scrolling beat-em-ups. And though there had absolutely been other genres cropping up, Final Fantasy and Zelda already being a few years old by this point, none of them had really been available to me because I was still largely dependent on the whims of adults to cater for and provide the games I would be playing. Even those library games still cost money to rent. It wasn't much, but it was more than I had. Also, well, side-scrollers were really popular, and that's what all of my friends were playing. Not to say I had a problem with that. I love me some Double Dragon and Streets of Rage. By the way, Streets of Rage 4 is fucking fantastic. Don't care what anyone else says. But here I was, for the first time, learning about RPGs. A tactical role-playing game, no less. And I was enthralled. This being the very first time I ever read an article about a game, to the best of my knowledge. Not just some short couple paragraph blurb, but an entire multi-page article. I read it over repeatedly, vowing that I would not forget and that someday, somehow, somewhere, I would find this game and it would be mine. I cannot overstate how large of an impact this article had on my young mind. It was like, for the first time, a video game was able to stand up and compare to what my imagination wanted them to be. Like I didn't need to fill in the blanks anymore. This was a literal representation of how I pictured them in my mind.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I still have that on my shelf as it happens. Physical box copy of it. An eternity passed, and my torment receded. What? Sorry. Came over all Legacy of Kain for a moment there. Cough. Hint. Hint. It was at least a year later, possibly two. There used to be a small gaming store in a shopping centre near where I lived at the time. Not only did they sell games, but they also rented them out, with a very liberal attitude towards returns, never mind the fact they'd rent them out to children. I was like 12. Myself being no more than 12 by that point. I should probably read ahead when I'm writing these, when I'm recording these things. Don't overcut this out. Whatever. Basically, you initially paid for the game for however long you intended to play it, and then just kept it for as long as you wanted. You'd just settle any outstanding balance on return, with nary a complaint. Maybe the occasional call to ask if you were done because someone else was asking for a game you had, or it was reserved, but that was about it. No premium late fees or anything like that. If it was £1 per week, and you kept it for 6 weeks, you paid an extra £5 when you took it back. I was there every week, at least. Staying on the bus on my way home from school every Friday. Primarily, my purpose was actually to buy a new book, because there was also a large bookstore in the same mall, and I used to save my lunch money for the week, which came out to just the right amount for a new novel. Paperbacks were typically about £5 at the time, £5. But one week in particular, I had a school friend, the only person I'm still in contact with to this day from my school years. He was coming to stay for the weekend at my grandma's house, actually, as it happens. I spent a lot of my weekends there. It's very close to my grandma. And there, after all this time, after lingering in the back of my head, there it was. Buck Rogers, Countdown to Doomsday for the Sega Mega Drive. Just sitting there, innocuous, on the shelf, waiting for me to notice it. Like it was meant to be. Like it had been placed there in response to my subconscious desires. And I spent the better part of half an hour, maybe longer, bullying my friend into renting it. I mean, not that he had to do it specifically, more that we could only afford one game between us, and he was completely disinterested and wanted to get something else. Fuck if I know what he wanted, but it sure as shit was not this. I think it was a platform game or something, shockingly enough. Needless to say, I actually won out eventually, and we left. Back at my grandma's house, we popped the cartridge in, and at that point we both knew that our passion for gaming was irrevocably changed for the better. Well, actually not straight away, because there were a couple of save files that we checked out and we had no fucking clue what we were doing, but as the day went on. And it was everything I hoped it would be and more. His initial trepidation rapidly evaporating to the point that to this day we both rank Doomsday amongst our favourite games ever. And we both still own a physical copy, as I mentioned earlier, for the blast processed console. And we go back to it every couple of years just because we can. Nostalgia goggles removed each and every time to remind us that, old as it may be, it's still just as good now as it was when we were kids.
But I'm not done yet!
From there, our horizons only expanded. Shining Force, Zelda, of course, and pretty much everything else we could get our hands on. So when Final Fantasy VII hit the scene 5 or so years later, you can bet your bottom dollar we were right on that dick. It's worth pointing out though, it wasn't our first rodeo. Not just RPGs as mentioned above, but the entire series. We both played Mystic Quest to death, so we had a pretty good idea what we were getting ourselves into. That's Final Fantasy Mystic Quest for those who don't know. As such, we weren't really blown away the same way a lot of people were. Which is not to say there's anything wrong with it, or even that we didn't have a blast, just that it wasn't the massive cognitive shift it's remembered as by a lot of people. For us, of course, that was Countdown to Doomsday. However, finally getting things on track, when Final Fantasy VIII was announced, I, in particular, was especially looking forward to the more life-real art style and confirmation that the love story aspect would be more front and centre. I know some people were left lukewarm by both of those things, but it was very much right up my alley. so much so that I was impatient and didn't wait for the official European release. There was this other little place we'd go to by then that had, shall we say, more colourful methods for providing people with their gaming fix. And both of us, the day it popped up on their stock list, went quickly home with our American copies of the game. Final Fantasy VIII, that is. I know the big thing people like to bring up is the junction system, how it was so radically different from what came before it, but it's not something that really matters to me. It was far from the first or last time the franchise had done something different, so I just took it in stride and was more focused on experiencing the story and the world. I'm pretty sure we both had also torn our way through Final Fantasy Tactics already, or at least around the same time, bought from the same place because the original PSX version never officially made it to European markets in physical format at all. Particularly that romance part that I previously alluded to, and oh boy, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. As the title and my opening statement may have clued you in, this is going to be the focus of my commentary going forward. I was 17 years old at the time when I played Final Fantasy VIII. The same age as the much maligned Squall. Maybe he's 18, I'm not sure. About the same age anyway. I was also quite an introspective, socially awkward young man that spent a lot of time inside my own mind. To say that I saw a lot of myself in the character would be a massive understatement. So the focus on inner monologue really struck a chord with me. At the time it just made sense, reflecting a lot of my own mindset to the world at large. Of course, I'm not a child soldier tasked with defending the entirety of existence, so that part took a little lateral thinking. But the propensity for mulling over my life was something that made me immediately know this was a character that was, if you will, literally me. Yeah, I know, it seems like I've just done exactly the opposite of what I said, but bear with me, because Squall's proclivity for standing aloof is an essential part of both the meta-narrative and his burgeoning relationship with Rinoa. His entire character arc is about him starting out as a self-inflicted social outcast, only to be brought out of his shell by that special person and friends. Something of a manic pixie dream girl before that was even really a thing. That's something I may come back to in more detail later actually, because the whole MPD subject is quite interesting. The manic pixie dream girl, I mean, not multiple personality disorder, or dissociative identity disorder, to give it its correct medical name. But anywho...
Hello.
This idea of Squall being whiny or emo is something that never really sat right with me. I don't really get where people are coming from. I understand that he obviously muses on his uncertainty regarding his actions, the weight of responsibility thrust upon him, but how could he not? He's a kid, and when you compare him to Cloud, as many do, okay, on the surface, he immediately seems like a complete step down. Cloud was confident, efficient, experienced, almost arrogant, cold and aloof, but slowly warming up as the game progresses. On the surface. But remember, actually think back and pay attention, those who've played it obviously. The guy was so cripplingly insecure, he made up an entirely new personality based on his idealized version of Zack. All of his bravado is not just for show, it's completely fabricated. He doesn't merely question his abilities, he's directly confronted with the fact that he pretty much doesn't have any. He's a bum, a complete nobody, and he falls apart because of it. He was the Final Fantasy version of the Stormtrooper that Obi-Wan waves his hand at. Not even that, because Stormtroopers are actually highly trained special forces. He was the bouncer standing at the cantina door. Was there even a bouncer? I don't remember. The guy behind the counter says, hey, we don't allow their kind in here. Whatever. It's not important what he actually was. Now, yes, it ultimately makes him an even stronger character in the end, because despite all this, he still steps up and gets shit done. But the stoic hero, he ain't. Meanwhile, Squall is a rather intriguing dichotomy. We see him spending a great deal of time weighing his actions, second guessing if he did the right thing, if he'll be able to win through next time around. And yet, every time he needs to act, he does. Without hesitation, decisive, committing to his course of actions and never backing down, just follows through until it's done. It's only after, when there are moments of calm, that he begins to mull over the ramifications. And yet, again, no matter how much he may doubt himself, he still does it all over again. Because, frankly, someone has to, and people are depending on him to be the unstoppable force of nature they all believe him to be. Calling him a whiny emo because he has the self-awareness to not only understand, but confront and accept he's going to make mistakes. Really? That's entirely the opposite. I'd like to do a quick experiment, because the only conclusion I've been able to draw is that people are making an uncharitable reading. Literally. Which is always a potential problem with raw text. It's a lot more difficult to convey tone with words alone. And my theory is that people are seeing a lot of their own insecurity reflected. Well, more of a hypothesis, I suppose. And rather than acknowledging that, they're railing against it. Hey, look, we're talking psychology again. Anyway, I don't usually do this kind of thing, but indulge me. I'm going to read through this little section in a few different ways, varying tones of voice, hopefully with strong enough acting chops to demonstrate the difference a little perspective can convey. I was originally going to use the bit from Fisherman's Horizon, but I chose to use this one instead because I think it's more potent. First, I'm going to do the whiny one, because people don't seem to really understand what whiny really sounds like. So let's play it like this. I liked him. Wasn't really a bad guy. He was one of us. Cypher, you've become just a memory. Will they talk about me this way if I die too? Squall was this and that, using past tense, saying whatever they want. So this is what death is all about? Not for me. I won't have it. I won't have it. I'm not having anyone talk about me in the past tense. That's what fucking whiny really sounds like. Seriously. So let's redo this. Let's assume he's frustrated and angry. I liked him. Wasn't really a bad guy. He was one of us. Cypher, you've become just a memory. Will they talk about me this way if I die too? Squall was this and that, using past tense, saying whatever they want. So this is what death is all about? Not for me. I won't have it. I won't have it. I'm not having anyone talk about me in the past tense. Okay, just one more, which is the way I think it's intended to be read, based on what we know of the character. I liked him. Wasn't really a bad guy. He was one of us. Cypher, you've become just a memory. Will they talk about me this way if I die too? Squall was this and that, using past tense, saying whatever they want. So this is what death is all about. Not for me. I won't have it. I won't have it. I'm not having anyone talk about me in the past tense. I know I'm not a great actor, but I think... Do you see what I mean? I've always viewed Squall as more of a cautious, introspective young man whose chief focus is on not shirking his responsibility. Far from being insecure in himself, he spends his quiet time digesting and analysing what he did, what he could have done differently, and if it's possible to do better next time. He doesn't want to make mistakes. He doesn't want to be a disappointment or let his friends down, and though he also has entirely no desire for the position of leadership pushed on him. He fully commits to accepting the weight of responsibility that comes along with it.
Come out, Autobot! We all must die sometime.
There's another key factor that people seem to keep glossing over, probably even now. Despite me having mentioned it already a few times. Squall is only 17 years old. I'm pretty sure I actually checked this up when I wrote the script, so he probably is 17. He's literally a bloody child. I mean, yeah, Cloud's only 21, and 4 years doesn't seem like all that much. Hell, there's an entire decade between my wife and I, and it's not really a huge difference in context. But at that age, going from your teens to early adulthood, that's a massive difference. It is literally life-changing. Even up until the age of roughly 25, your brain is still growing and developing. And I mean, it literally never stops developing. But I'm going to resist the urge to go into a lengthy tangent about neuroplasticity. So up until the age of 25, it's not just changing, the brain is literally still growing. It's not fully grown until mid to late 20s. A little bit later for men, a little bit earlier for women. It's around 25. This is why the most stupid things people do seem to abruptly cease completely once they hit their mid-20s, because the prefrontal cortex, the section of the brain that most heavily influences impulse control, is the last thing to fully form. It's fascinating stuff. And there are some pretty clear reasons for precisely why this happens. Just think about it again. The mid-20s is roughly the point in life where you peak, physically. Not necessarily the point where you're at your physical best, but certainly the last time when you can achieve the best you could ever be. Your best before date, if you will. With everything that comes after, no matter how hard and efficient you may train, you can never reach the same comparable levels. I'm actually in better physical condition now at 43 than I ever was in my 20s. But if I'd applied myself the same way I have now at that age, I'd be far, far fitter then than I am now. I just didn't do it that way around. Did it again. You could, like myself, actually be in better shape now at 43 than you were in your late teens. I've been far more active and I'm generally far more comfortable in myself now than I ever have been. I'm actually in even better shape now than I was when I first wrote this because of the lifestyle I've been leading. But though the current me could wipe the floor with edgy teen me as I was, if I'd applied myself the same way then that I do now, it would be a completely different story. Though I do have more experience now, but still, the younger me would have been far fitter and far more capable, potentially. Like with everyone though, those years of life are when we have the most physical potential. Just look at things like the Olympics if you don't believe me. There's a reason they're all so damned young, apart from those rare, one-of-a-kind outliers. There are always outliers. Even the most dedicated and skilled athletes just cannot keep up as each year goes by. There's a fairly significant drop-off that happens a lot faster than we realise. Hell, even by your early 20s, you're already heading into the downswing of fitness potential. So, of course, that's when the brain kicks in full force and starts telling you to take it easy. Daddy, chill. Time to shift your focus to more long-term plans and start making a family, assuming you survived that long, because in the past, a lot of people didn't because they were fighting fucking 800-pound tigers with sticks. Get yourself a more senior position, sort out that work-life balance, whether it's work or just in general life, start passing on your skills to the ones coming up behind you, and focus on creating the next generation of dumbass children so they can do the same thing all over again. Rinse, repeat. The species persists. Seriously, just look into it for a few minutes. No links because lazy, but it's some really fascinating and well understood and documented stuff. Read up on neuroplasticity while you're at it. That shit is mind-blowing. Literally. Hee. Also, as it happens, I had my first child when I was 24, so I fit right in with that. And all of this is actually fully relevant to the subject at hand. As I said, I was also a teenager when I first played the game, almost the exact same age as Squall, because the similarities in thought processes weren't significant enough. So, yes, my own brain has changed massively since my first time around. But unlike with some people, far from sharpening my distastes, becoming something I look back on and feel ever more uncomfortable with, largely because I never felt that way to begin with, yes, but mostly because I've changed enough to appreciate both the character from his perspective, as well as the writing energies that went into making him so awkward. There is, however, one area in which my opinion has shifted quite dramatically, and that is the character of Rinoa, not Squall. Or, more specifically, the relationship she develops with Squall. I've actually softened towards her for the most part, as a character. Initially I found her to be a bit flat and often extremely overbearing. However, being an awkward, insular and introspective young man, there was a certain appeal to the apparently gregarious, socially skilled, cool girl taking a liking to me and helping me come out of my shell and be the best that I can be. Someone who could see through the rough exterior and appreciate the person within, if you will. I liked the idea. But there's the problem. I liked the idea. On the surface. It was something that promised to be life-changing, spurring on a social and intellectual awakening that would endow me with all the skills necessary to become a master of societal expectation, the centre of attention, like a flame of pure excitement that people would be drawn to, flocking to just to bask in the warm glow of the great mover of people's hearts. A nice idea with a degree of appeal. On the surface. Exactly what some people truly do wish for, of course. But not I, nor Squall, as evidenced by how he persists in railing against it throughout the majority of the game. As players, we can become very caught up in the progression of their burgeoning relationship, so that moments like the love song aboard the Ragnarok and Squall carrying Rinoa down the train tracks can hit pretty hard. They mark a distinct, overt shift in him, clearly demonstrating how much more open to social interaction he has become, right? Right? No, not even close. All of these moments, like every single one of them, they are all quiet, intimate moments of him either alone, pondering, or with Rinoa only. He never gives any real, overt signs of his emotional turmoil when in the presence of others, or at least when he does, there's a lot more going on, and frankly, most people can't see the fingers at the end of their own dick hole, so who's even going to notice? Simply put, he's an introvert through and through, and it's quite clear that he isn't going to change despite the efforts of those around him, which is absolutely fine. That's the person he is, and this is why it's bothered me for so long. He doesn't need to change. Why would he? And why the fuck nuggets should he do it for someone else? Think about this. If he does change, he's no longer going to be an authentic version of himself, ultimately becoming a person different than the one that Rinoa supposedly fell in love with. Meanwhile, if he doesn't change, would she still be so enamored of him? The real him, not the potential idealized version of him she has formed inside her own mind. She's clearly a very social person, rather insecure herself it seems. Remember, in the infamous dance scene, she only dances with Squall initially because she wants to make Cypher jealous. not the greatest way to begin a romance now, is it? It's extremely selfish. Of course, she does change over time, moves away from that and develops legitimate affection for him, but it's still there. It's still something that happened, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to move on from. But it can absolutely happen. I've personally known several relationships that have started out fucking outright hostile, only to blossom into, thus far at least, lifelong partnerships. Plus, they're both just kids, and kids do dumb things all the time. It's not really right to hold that against them once they've matured out of it. Neuroplasticity, anyone? Human beings are a deeply social species. It's a fundamental element of what led to the immense success we've seen in the modern world. Communication and cooperation are the driving force behind pretty much everything about human society. These very tools I am using right now, my MacBook for the talking, this mic, the computer I'm recording on, to convey my thoughts, YouTube, on this equally collaborative work of art that I'm discussing at this very moment. Most people are flooded with a massive rush of dopamine when interacting with and helping another human being. Doing a good deed makes you feel good, often the act itself. Though it's also depressingly common that the recognition of the act is the true moment of reward. This is why we see so many of those "I did this cool thing for a homeless person" videos. I fucking hate that shit.
What is the matter with you people?
For the majority, this is great. It lets them all live together in a bright pink, warm and fluffy yellow submarine, all hooked up in a massive circle jerk of social reinforcement. It feels good for everyone involved. They all get mostly what they want out of it and just generally enjoy the warm glow of being part of such a cosy safety net of other upright apes. The very presence of other people being enough for many to feel like everything is right with the world, the natural order maintained, and that's great for them. It's not so good for the outliers, people like myself. It seems especially powerful in my own case because I'm both autistic and introverted. No, they are not the same thing. And some of the most social people you'll ever meet are autistic. Shonk! If you have a group, any group of notable size, there's going to be a huge swathe of diversity among them, or swath if you prefer. Has an E on the end, so it's swathe. No matter how similar they may be, no matter what the reason they came together as a cohesive group, the similarities outweigh the differences. But those divergent elements don't just go away. No matter how much some may try to make it true, you cannot change who you are, only the way you present yourself. The part of you that you allow people to see. And here is where the real difficulties begin. Because, see, social people are extremely social. And it makes them feel weird when someone else isn't. It can be extremely distressing for them to not get the response they expect, the response they know to be correct, the best way to be. Social people get really uncomfortable around introverts. They simply cannot get out of their own headspace and understand why someone else might not be relatable to them. There's something that must be broken inside you. You just haven't met the right person, done the right thing, gotten the right response. You must be sad, lonely, afraid to put yourself out there, something like that. I don't fucking know. I'm an introvert. I'd rather be at home playing a video game or reading a book or watching educational videos about exoplanets. I'm all over that dick, making YouTube videos. And whilst we're on the subject, I want to go off on a bit of a tangent here, because whilst I've been replaying this for the footage, I noticed something. Squall's autistic. I don't mean he's coded autistic, I don't mean they intended him to be or anything like that, but he's straight up fucking autistic. Take the scene, I'll put it on screen here, at the end of the garden festival when he's talking to Rinoa. She asks him to be more open, and he says, fine, I'll do that, I'll ask for help when I need it, I'll be more open with you guys, and she loses her shit. It's like, and he's just there like, what the fuck did I do? I told you exactly what you wanted. I've been there. That is my fucking life. Every time I've had conversations like this, they've always tried to do this, and I've said, okay, and then they're like, you're not giving the correct response. What fucking response do you want from me? What more can I do than say, yeah, okay, I'll try? Funnily enough, next paragraph, I've tried, like, really fucking tried, really damned hard, to explain to people that I just want a bit of time to myself. Some space to be on my own and decompress. Like, literally, I want you to do nothing. Not that I don't want you to do anything, that I literally want you to do nothing. No thing. Just go about your business. Do your own thing. Whatever it is you want to do, go do that. Have an orgy with 12 multicolored space goats. Knock yourself out. Just do it somewhere else and leave me out of it. No, I'm not making a cry for help. It's not reverse psychology. It is not an effort to get your attention. I literally, fucking literally, like the actual definition of literally, which means the exact thing, want you to fuck off and leave me alone. But why didn't you just say so? There's no need to be rude. I did! Repeatedly! And you didn't fucking listen until I was rude about it. Fuck!
Strike me down with all of your hatred, and your journey towards the dark side will be complete.
Got a little spicy for a moment there. That really shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who's been here before, though. It does make me wonder, though. Allow me a moment for a complete aside tangent that is written this time. A question for y'all. What does everyone think about my more personal moments of disquisition? I said I'd remember that word. I mean, I'm not going to change my style regardless, because I am who I am, but I do wonder how it comes across and what your ultimate opinion is. So, genuine request for feedback on these last few minutes. Anywho, another tangent, but related. I'd like to draw some contrast between the characters of Rinoa and Selphie, because I couldn't talk about Final Fantasy VIII without mentioning Selphie. Far and away my favourite character of the entire franchise. Which sounds a bit mental, since, if anything, she's even more social and bubbly than Rinoa is. She's even the one that most fervently works to bring Squall out of his shell, so to speak. She's the one who gets the chance to feign terminal shock at him showing a moment of concern, assuming you choose the correct response when you accompany her to Trebia Garden, or if you see her after Balam Garden. Is it Balam? The main garden. If you see her after that's destroyed and the stage is destroyed. It just, although the latter one isn't as good, but that's more because she's in shock. It hits different because of who she is and the way she does it. She encourages Squall consistently, and that's a very important distinction. She's just an all-around bubbly, playful person. She doesn't want him to change, doesn't even try to make him change. She just encourages her friend, letting him know she's always there if he wants, and if not, no worries, mate. She can just hop into the Ragnarok and go Tokyo drifting around the sun for a few hours. Could totally see her doing that. She actually reminds me, in a very real sense, of someone I know in Analog World. My one remaining friend from high school, I mentioned earlier. He rings me repeatedly. I spoke to him earlier today, actually, yesterday now, but yeah. Knowing full well I'm just not going to answer. Then leaves me lengthy, rambling voice messages he also knows I'm not going to listen to, at least not fully. And that's all fine. He knows me, he knows what I'm like, and he's just letting me know he'll be around if and when I choose to respond. No pressure, just, if you feel like it. Let's shoot the shit about the powers of salt. Oh, what the fuck ever. Salt! Want to come out to a concert? No, that's cool. You do you, mate. That's Selphie. Just, far more female and high schooly. If it had been a love story about Selphie and Squall, that would have been perfect, I think. Each time I go back to it, I have multiple, oh yeah, moments in the narrative, because honestly, I don't remember Rinoa all that much. A lot of what she gets up to, specifically in the romance aspect, slip out of my mind because it just doesn't work for me. But Selphie? I have many fond memories of the shenanigans she gets up to, jumping off the cliff, getting super excited flying the Ragnarok, trains. She's super engaging. Her enthusiasm is infectious rather than all up in your face. When musing over an introvert-extrovert relationship, that's the kind of thing I expect. The kind that would work. There's nothing wrong with being introverted. Nothing at all. We don't need to be fixed. It's just the way we are. Obviously, it's a whole different level of fuck, but it's comparable to the way some insist they can fix the gays. They're not taking uber schlong just to be a bit silly. And no, you utter baboon, one good dick won't convert her. People are gay because, well, because they're gay. That's who they are. And introverts are introverts because they relax by being alone. Social interaction may even be a hell of a lot of fun for us, but it's also extremely draining. We need that quiet introspection to be emotionally and psychologically healthy. We're introverts because we are fucking introverts. Rinoa just does not understand that. She's so caught up in her own view of how a healthy person should behave that she just cannot wrap her head around the idea that there will always be those outside of the norm. Not abnormal, no, before anyone tries to say that, because someone usually does. The norm, the standard, baseline, the most common, the mode in mathematical terms. That's the norm. The middle ground into which most people or things can be categorized. But because I haven't said it enough already, there will always be outliers. Statistical curios that don't break the model, they merely add more nuance to them. And that's what an introvert is. Someone who drifts away from the center and does things in a perhaps more roundabout way. Realistically, it's nothing more unusual than, say, a house cat with a perfect line of opposing colours down the centre of their face. It stands out, sure, looks different than you'd expect, but it's still perfectly normal, just uncommon, outside of the norm. Something you don't see every day. Not something you would think of as impossible or dangerous or something that needs to be fixed. It just keeps coming back to the fact that human beings are social creatures. They, a very large percentage, feel uncomfortable when someone else isn't, when they aren't social. It confuses them, and people fear what they do not understand. This, weird tangent, but let's go. This is where religion came from.
This is awkward.
I'm not going to expound on my thoughts on religion, but think about it. Past huge mans did not understand the world as well as we do. Not that they were incapable of doing so, not that they lacked the big braining to find the correct answers. They simply did not have access to all of the tools and resources we now, largely, take for granted. No radio telescopes or mass accelerators, so when they looked up into the sky and saw distant points of light twinkling down at them, they did what people do, and compared it to the information they did have. From a distance, a campfire looked pretty much identical, so it's not an unreasonable assumption to declare that stars are the same thing, placed there in the sky by a magnanimous someone as a way to help guide them. Meanwhile, knowing it was nigh impossible for regular old Dave with the gammy leg to get up there into the great black, it must have been someone with pretty swish skills, powers beyond the ken of stabbing a lion in the face with a pointy stick. A superhuman, if you will. And of course, it must have been a huge man, because we'd seen enough other aminals to know they didn't do that kind of thing, like fires, I mean. And thus, religion was born. Add time, new ideas, the pig-headed uncertainty of the human condition, and it grew into what we see today. Because, hot take, human beings are timid, superstitious creatures. And I'm not talking about less developed nations that haven't been exposed to our much deeper understanding of the universe. Human beings, 201, myself included, are scared little children playing in the halls of the gods. Don't believe me? Well, when was the last time you saw an anti-vaxxer or a climate change denier? We can quibble over specifics, but it's all the same thing. Fear of science, outright denial, stems from the same place. I don't understand it. It's scary. Ergo, it must be wrong. So extrapolate out from that, back to what I was saying about social people. Because humans are an extremely social species, we don't have big claws and mahoosive teeth to numb a predator's face off, so we band together into tight-knit groups for mutual protection. One person, don't care how fucking tough you are, cannot sucker punch a tiger and just walk away for an early pint. Not on your own. It just ain't going to happen. Escape and survive, maybe. Yeah, that happens. But you ain't going to get into a fist fight with one and just walk it off. But get yourself a nice little group going with some big sticks and fire, suddenly it's a whole different story. At the very least, you have a chance of surviving, if not the whole troop. Safety in numbers. You might even take it down. Of course, if you're like Kazuma Kiryu, you can just punch it in the face. But he is outside the ken of most men. So yeah, I get it. I understand the mechanism and the origin of the cognitive bias, and I can even empathise. I will even accept and tolerate it much of the time, for as long as I can. So Mix-a-Lot, I can only do that for so long before my own cognitive bias comes into play. There's only so much space in your glass. Sooner or later, it's going to flow over and spill everywhere. Make a big old mess. Just be generally a pain in the ass. Except I'm not a glass of water. I'm a thinking, feeling person. An introvert. Someone who needs, and I must stress this again, needs time to myself to be psychologically and emotionally healthy. Continuing to push doesn't address the problem. It is the problem. You are the problem. So you're probably wondering then, well maybe not because I haven't really said it, but why is Final Fantasy VIII my favourite game in the series? If the particulars of the relationship between Rinoa and Squall, which bothers me so much, is a driving focus of the game, why do I still love it so much? And, well, I mean, you don't have to adore every aspect of a thing to value it highly. In fact, I fervently argue the exact opposite. Loving something or one is not about ignoring their flaws. It's seeing them and accepting it or them precisely as they are. A bit like that line in Bicentennial Man. It's the imperfections which make something special. Does anybody remember that film? I don't remember the exact quote, and I'm too lazy to check, but that's what it meant. Well, like I said, the way I remember the game, or the narrative at least, isn't built around the love story, despite it being so prevalent. I remember cool moments with Selphie, Cypher calling Zell chicken wuss, Garden's hot dogs, and the game's systems. I know the draw mechanic bothers a lot of people, but barely registers for me. It's a bit of a grind early on, sure, but if you're a grinder like I am, then it's all part of the experience. I like being able to overdo it so that I'm an unstoppable force of nature. My first course of action is to head down to the beach and start abusing the Fastiter Kalons, so I can learn a few GF skills as quickly as possible. And they offer the most AP at the beginning of the game, so I just grab some magic whilst I'm at it. Pop the cursor in memory and just hold down the button, and that's all I'm going to say, because this video isn't about breaking the game. And believe me, you can absolutely fucking break Final Fantasy VIII with the draw system if you start getting into the GF powers. Anyway, There is one thing I really need to touch on, though, before I start bringing this around to an actual point, and that would be the music. I mean, just listen to this. Every single time I get to this scene, it just does things to me. Breaks down the barriers of my cold, jaded heart, and I start to feel. My heart grows 3 sizes that day. And then there's this. I don't know why, but this just breaks me. Even in isolation, if I ever hear it, mood, as the kids say. Fucking roses and wine. Music is such an underappreciated aspect of televisual media, or rather good, appropriate music, because it's not all about having music, even great music. It's about knowing when to use it, how to use it. Far too often we have overpowering, massive orchestral compositions thrown over the top of everything, drowning out what's actually important to try and force you to a specific emotional state, rather than acting to enhance or, underscore the moment. The best music, the best tone-setting music shouldn't ever be noticed. It should just be there, working in the background, so that we become more keenly aware of its absence when it drifts away, with only a few, the most essential moments, being where it comes to the forefront. And that is precisely what Fragments of Memories and Roses and Wine do. So good.
Moving on.
The crux of my thesis, as I already alluded to, is that Rinoa and Squall are just too different. And whilst it is true that opposites attract, that only applies up to a point. There has to be some common ground upon which to build a lasting foundation. And this is simply not present in their relationship. The friction we initially see as cute and endearing from an outside perspective doesn't just go away. And there was a study done some years ago dealing with this sort of specific thing. Pet peeves, to be factually precise. Small, seemingly innocuous problems that grow more urgent as time goes by. Essentially, science, I don't have the link because, again, I'm lazy, but essentially, your body develops a literal allergic reaction to pet peeves. What initially seems like nothing important, rather than fading away over time, it builds, propagates, germinates, like this idea that you can build up a tolerance to poison by slowly acclimating your system to it over a period of months and years. There is a small, very distant grain of truth to the concept, but the reality is that you just slowly poison yourself to death. Or in the case of pet peeves, each exposure to it grates at your nerve endings just a little more insistently, building over time to the point where it ceases to be a minor thing and can quite literally escalate to murder. Like, there's a news story I heard like 30 years ago now that sticks with me precisely because, well, he complained about the peas. So she stabbed her husband to death. That's what she said. See, it wasn't the peas themselves that were the problem. It was him, his constant complaints. So many of them about so many things over so many years. That was the thing that pushed her over the edge in the end. Or maybe she beat him to death with a pan. Whatever. Point is, he dead because he wouldn't stop moaning like a little bitch. I mean, that's horrible, but it's also uncomfortably relatable. When something, a small, seemingly innocuous thing bothers us, repeat exposure spurs the body to respond to it like an allergy. Yeah, like literally, an allergy. Like I said, the body responds with an allergic reaction, just not one that can be treated with antihistamines. Something which anyone with allergies will know only becomes more pronounced as time goes by, because on top of the physiological reaction, the anticipation, anxiety if you will, leaves one braced for the inevitable, and that's the real kicker. It's like watching a film and knowing a jump scare is coming. It's not the musical sting or sudden motion that gets us, it's the waiting for it, not knowing exactly when, a good jump scare anyway. The scare itself is actually a release, giving us an out for all the built-up tension. Not so with something that irks you though, especially when it's something so minor. Because then you start getting into the whole thing, you know that you shouldn't be bothered because it's such a minor thing. Like leaving a jacket on the floor, for example. My kid does that. But it does bother you. And then that bothers you. You know what I mean? Plus, it is such a minor thing, so why don't they just pick up the jacket off the fucking floor and put it on a coat hanger? They know it annoys you. It's no fucking effort on their part. Don't be such a dick and just pick up after yourself, you absolute fucking baboon. And relax. But seriously though, I'm sure we all understand precisely what I mean. Now, imagine those seemingly minor things actually accounting for significant elements of who you are as a person. Not little things that are a minor inconvenience, but that something that seems like nothing to them, but to you is fundamentally anathema to your cognitive existence. I spoke about that at some length already, but basically if someone is an introvert, it's not a choice. It's not something that person merely believes to be preferable. An introverted person literally needs that quiet time, so trying to push them to come out of their shell is tantamount to telling a depressed person to just not be sad. It simply does not work that way. So Rinoa constantly riding Squall's ass to express himself more, to be more socially involved, isn't going to suddenly change who he is. It's not going to wear him down. Maybe he'll go along with it for a while because it feels easier than persisting in his own methodology. But that can only last so long before the pressure gets to him and he has to completely remove himself from everything. Either way, he's going to break. Perhaps go off on a sabbatical, accept some new seed mission that has him working far away, all alone. The particulars don't matter. The point is, it can't work. Not long term. And the game, even unintentionally if nothing else, already implicitly prepared us for this possibility. Just look at Laguna and Julia. They're almost exact mirrors of their children, with Laguna being the outgoing personality. He's drawn to Julia because she seems intriguing, because it's hard to see exactly what's going on underneath. And yes, ultimately, it's him being away with the Galbadian army, and later his journalistic pursuits that ultimately nixes any potential relationship. But really the distance only facilitated. Meeting Rain, someone far closer in mindset to him, someone who can push back and stand toe to toe with him emotionally. That's what really stops anything from happening. He gets over his infatuation and forms a relationship with a person simply better suited to him. And Squall is nothing if not his father's son. He has his own way of doing things. He knows his own mind. And yes, by the way, Squall is actually Laguna's son. That's canon, as confirmed. And yes, he is unflinchingly loyal to those he loves, but he will not, cannot, sacrifice his core being for anything. Because here's the thing. When you fall in love with someone, be that romantic or purely friendship, it is the person as they are that you are attracted to. If you try to do anything to change them, they are no longer the person you loved to begin with. Even if your intention is to help them improve, well, good intentions? The only way you can be the person everyone else truly wants you to be is to be the best version of yourself. Like, actually yourself. You. Not the version of you that they have romanticized. Because love is not about ignoring the flaws in a person. It's about seeing them and accepting them anyway. But in this instance, even if Rinoa was to come to that realization, I can't see her continuing. They are, say it with me now, just too different. I don't know if I actually said that as many times as I thought I did, but whatever. Either they'll grow apart, developing a degree of resentment one way, the other, or both, or they will simply realise they don't work together in that way and continue as what they should have been all along. Comrades, friends.
I understood that reference.
You know, the game itself even portrays a great example of the kind of relationship people think this is, or that it's apparently trying to be. Irvin and Selphie. Think about it. She's carefree, bubbly and outgoing, always chipper and energetic, no matter how terrible things may be. She just doesn't give up. And yes, she is best girl. No contest. Anyway, Irvin, on the other hand, puts on a tough outer shell. He wants to present himself as the gruff, ruthless lone wolf. Nothing ever gets to him because he doesn't care about anything other than himself. But truth be told, he's almost cripplingly insecure. Fucking Squall has to give him an uplifting pep talk so that he doesn't fuck up the mission at the end of Disc 1. Also, is it just me? Or is he fucking Japanese Michael Jackson? I have always thought that. Anyway, Selphie gives zero fucks about any of that, even him being Michael Jackson. She does have a weird cowboy Michael Jackson fetish and just goes with it. Only showing any real sign of displeasure when he starts side-eyeing some of the other girls at Garden in the final cutscene footage unrelated, because I couldn't be asked cutting to it for something so relatively minor. The point is, they're directly comparable to the primary deuteragonists, fitting the archetype both as characters and their relationships to a god's damned T. Again, unintentionally underscoring my point. Well, maybe. See, I've spoken about this before. Once a work is out there in the world at large, like it or lump it, the audience takes ownership. Not of the work itself, usually, but of what they take away from it. It doesn't really matter what your intentions are or were. People play I'll Be Watching You as their marriage anthem, despite knowing how disturbingly creepy it is, because to them it still sounds really sweet and romantic, and that's fine, actually. If a consumer takes away a completely different message from your work, that's their business. Though going and telling the creator they're wrong about James looking at the player, whatever. Point is, headcanon is a real thing, and thus for me as a player, all of these parallels I'm driving at are clear as day. So, to me, it all comes together to reinforce my understanding of the narrative and its inevitable fallout. However, my own desire to always strive for intellectual integrity demands that I acknowledge my conclusions could be entirely incorrect. Hence, I don't know if they were supposed to be an example of a doomed romance. So I throw out some qualifiers to reflect that I could be mistaken in the team's intention, despite still speaking with absolute conviction about what I understand it all to mean. The point is, whether it was a deliberate decision or otherwise, both the meta-narrative and the subplots serve to perfectly demonstrate what I'm talking about. And I think I've done enough to demonstrate that personally, even if much of it is personal subjectivity. But then, isn't that true of all art? Good art, anyway? Though, before we wrap this up, I want to make it very clear this isn't intended as an indictment of Rinoa as a character. The footage you've seen should have clearly demonstrated that she's a mainstay of my chosen party, and I'm not the kind to do that if I flat out detest them, even if they, like she, are an absolute fucking powerhouse. That helps, sure, but if I can't stand them, I'm gonna make do without. One last time, let's just say it. They're just too different. And that's absolutely fine. If anything, to be entirely honest, I think it makes their relationship all the more engaging. They're both so young, they have next to no experience of the real world. Rinoa is a spoiled rich kid insulated from the reality of the war she despises so much, and Squall is a kid that was indoctrinated into being a soldier at a young age, a literal child soldier. Coupled with his inherently insular personality, it's not at all unusual that his social skills are non-existent. Despite having so many people around him at all times, he remained painfully aware of the potential pitfalls of forming long-term relationships. Wow, that was a really weird pronunciation, but I'm going to leave it in. Seed squads frequently change from assignment to assignment. Never mind the fact that people have an annoying habit of doing the old unaliving, as the kids say, when they're being stabbed in the face. It's going to take a lot of persistence to break through walls like that. And remember, even if that is something that Rinoa does not do alone. I alluded to it earlier, but really it's Selphie that has the largest effect on the way Squall views the world. Quistis tries, but she repeatedly fails and, if anything, pushes him further into his shell, because she's overtly attempting to affect his way of thinking, whilst Selphie just acts like a good friend and supports him, or gives him a kick in the arse when he actually needs it. And I think that's all she wrote. Otherwise, I'm just going to spend the next hour gushing over Selphie. She's a great character, and, you know, maybe I will come back at some future date to talk about her specifically. But for now, I'm going to end it with one little side note. I did say that I might start talking about the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. I did ask on Twitter, didn't get many respondents, and the general consensus about whether Rinoa qualifies as a Manic Pixie Dream Girl is, yeah, maybe, sort of. But I watched the 3 main offender films for them. Was it 3? Or was it 2? Elizabethtown, the one with the guy from Scrubs, which I really like, actually. I did watch them, and I don't really want to go into it because I think that the whole subject is actually quite condescending. But no, she's not a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, and neither are the characters in those films they talk about. This whole thing is blown way out of proportion as another uncharitable reading. So, that's all she wrote. I have a Patreon if you feel so inclined to help me out. But I've been doing this long enough by now that I think it should be clear I'm not in it for the money. Would be most appreciated all the same. Also, feel free to add your 2 cents down below. Agree? Disagree? Don't care? Whatever? How about you? And until next time, thank you for watching.